There's a moment, quiet, often overlooked, when your soul whispers that there's more, not just more in terms of achievement or success, not even more in the sense of opportunity, but more of God, more of His presence, more of His voice, and it's in that space, between the noise of this world and the silence of your spirit, that you begin to truly hear God is speaking to you. You don't have to wait for the skies to part. You don't need thunder or lightning to validate His voice, and you certainly don't need perfection. You just need presence, a moment of pause, a stillness that says, God, I'm here, speak. Because the truth is, He's always been speaking. The question isn't whether God speaks. The question is, are you listening? I know what it's like to question that, to ask yourself, was that God or was it just me? I know what it feels like to doubt whether you're even worthy of hearing from Him. To think, why would the Creator of the universe speak to someone like me? But let me tell you something. He speaks to you because you are His. He speaks because that's what love does. Love communicates. Love reveals. Love draws near. Some of you have been waiting for a dramatic encounter, but can I remind you that God often moves in the subtle? It's in the quiet nudge, the thought that won't let go, the dream that keeps returning, the scripture that shows up everywhere, that inexplicable peace in the middle of chaos, that moment when a sermon or a song feels like it was written just for you. That's not coincidence. That's conversation. God has been weaving messages into your everyday moments, in the way your heart stirred when you saw that child laugh, in the way tears formed when you looked at the stars and felt something bigger than yourself, in the silence that felt sacred, not empty. That was Him, speaking, calling, loving. You see, the enemy would love for you to believe that you're too far, too broken, too distracted to hear God, but the enemy is a liar. The truth is, even in your mess, even in your doubt, even in your confusion, God is still speaking. His voice isn't reserved for the perfect. It's offered to the willing. It's time to tune your spirit. Because God is not hiding. He's not distant. He's not playing a game of hide and seek with your destiny. He is near, closer than your breath. And if you would only quiet the chaos, if you would only silence the internal critic, you would realize He's been speaking all along. There are things He's been wanting to reveal to you, blueprints for your purpose, keys for your healing, peace for your anxious mind, clarity where you've only known confusion, but those things are often found in stillness. In surrender, in those moments when you stop trying to make it happen on your own and simply say, Lord, I'm listening. It's not about striving, it's about abiding. When you abide in Him, when your heart leans in, you start to recognize His voice with ease. You stop guessing yourself. You stop dismissing the divine. You begin to move with confidence, not because you have all the answers, but because you know who's guiding you. God speaks in different ways. Maybe it's through His word, maybe through people, maybe through dreams, visions, impressions. Maybe He speaks to you in worship. Maybe when you're walking, journaling, or just being still. But make no mistake, He speaks. And when He does, it shifts everything. Some of you are waiting for confirmation of what your spirit already knows. You've been asking for signs, but your soul has already received the instruction. It's not more signs you need. It's more trust. You know what He said. You felt it. And now it's time to move in obedience, even when the path isn't fully visible. God doesn't speak to tease you. He speaks to lead you. He speaks to heal you. He speaks to remind you who you really are, because sometimes life makes you forget. Sometimes pain, disappointment, rejection. They try to silence the voice of truth in you, but when God speaks, identity is restored. When He speaks, you remember your calling, you remember your worth. You remember that you are not forgotten, and I want to tell someone this. You are not crazy, that thing you keep sensing. That pull toward a new season that's stirring in your heart, it's not your imagination, it's God. He's inviting you deeper, and yes, it might be unfamiliar, it might be uncomfortable, but it is also holy. This is a season to believe that you can actually hear God for yourself, not just through someone else, not just on Sundays, but in the everyday, in the mundane, in the sacred and the ordinary. You don't have to outsource your intimacy with God. He desires relationship with you, not the curated version of you, not the filtered, cleaned-up version, you in all your complexity. He delights in speaking to you, so let go of the fear, let go of the doubt. Let go of the belief that you have to earn his voice. His voice is a gift, and the more you receive it, the more you recognize it. Like any relationship, the more time you spend, the deeper the connection. You were made to hear him. You were designed for communion with your Creator, and even when you miss it, even when you ignore it, he speaks again. Grace will find you. His voice will always find you, because he is faithful. God speaks to you, not just to inform you, but to transform you, to awaken you, to prepare you, to align you with heaven's rhythm for your life, and the more you listen, the more you'll walk in the fullness of who you were created to be. So today, I pray that your ears would be opened, that your heart would be attuned, that your spirit would become sensitive to the whisper of the Holy Spirit. May you realize that you're not just hoping to hear from God, you already are. God is speaking to you. Now, will you answer? God's voice is not reserved for the perfect. It's offered to the willing. That truth alone can dismantle so many of the lies we often carry about. Who qualifies to hear from God? There's a tendency in human nature to measure worthiness by performance. We look at our mistakes, our inconsistencies, the places where we feel spiritually dry or distant, and we conclude that we must not be good enough to hear from God. But God doesn't operate according to human standards. He speaks not based on perfection, but on relationship. He speaks because he loves, because he is a father, and a good father always desires to speak with his children. Throughout Scripture, God spoke to people who were flawed, broken, and in progress. Moses had a stutter and ran from his calling. David was a shepherd boy who later committed grave sins. Paul persecuted believers before becoming one of the greatest voices in the early church. Yet God chose to speak to them, guide them, use them. Why? Because they were willing to listen, willing to be changed, willing to walk with God even in their imperfections. Willingness is the posture that opens the door to divine conversation. It's not about how eloquently you pray or how many Bible verses you can quote. It's about the heart that says, Lord, I may not have it all together, but I'm here, speak to me. That heart moves God. That openness, that hunger, it's where intimacy begins. Because God is not looking for polished vessels, he's looking for surrendered ones. There's freedom in knowing that you don't have to clean yourself up to hear from him. You don't have to wait until you've reached a certain level of spiritual maturity. He meets you exactly where you are, and in fact, it's often in your most fragile, uncertain moments that his voice becomes clearest. When your defenses are down, when you're tired of striving, when you finally say, I can't do this without you, that's when he speaks right into your soul, not to shame you, but to affirm you, to guide you, to remind you that he's still with you. Many miss his voice because they're waiting to be better, but God never asked you to be perfect before showing up. He just asks you to be present. He just asks you to be willing, to lean in, to believe that his voice is for you, not just for pastors, prophets, or spiritual giants. For you, the moment you embrace that truth, your ears begin to open, your heart begins to soften. You begin to realize that he's been speaking all along. You just needed the courage to believe he would. His presence speaks louder than the noise of the world. In a time where we are constantly surrounded by voices, social media, news outlets, opinions, expectations, fears, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, even disoriented. The noise is persistent. It tells you who you should be, what you should fear, what you're lacking, and how far you have to go. But God's presence cuts through all of that. It doesn't shout to compete with the world. Instead, it quiets the world within you. There's a stillness that comes when you lean into him, a calm that reminds you that you are not defined by the chaos around you, but by the voice that dwells within you. God's presence is not just a feeling. It's a reality that shifts everything. It recalibrates your spirit. It brings things into alignment. When you are surrounded by noise, it's hard to discern truth from lies, fear from faith, anxiety from discernment. But one moment in the presence of God can bring clarity to what felt confusing, peace to what felt stormy, and light to what felt hidden. That's the power of His presence. It doesn't always answer every question, but it anchors you in the truth that He is with you. And when you are anchored in that truth, the noise loses its grip. The presence of God speaks in ways the world never can. It speaks identity when the world shouts comparison. It speaks rest when the world demands hustle. It speaks grace when the world deals in performance. It speaks love when the world is obsessed with worthiness. And the beautiful thing is, you don't have to escape your life to find that presence. You don't have to wait for a perfect moment or a perfect setting. His presence meets you where you are, in your car, in your kitchen, in your room, in your weakness. You just have to become aware. There are times when you feel everything but peace, and in those moments you might wonder where God is. But His presence is not absent. It's just being overshadowed by the noise you haven't silenced yet. That's why it's so important to be intentional about creating space. Sometimes that space is physical, turning off the phone, stepping away from the demand. Sometimes it's emotional, letting go of your need to have it all figured out. Sometimes it's spiritual, saying, God, I need you more than I need answers. In that space, His voice becomes undeniable, His love becomes tangible. You begin to see how much louder His presence is than anything trying to distract you. It doesn't force itself. It fills what's empty, and when it does, you start to live from a place of assurance, not reaction. You stop responding to every noise because you've already heard what matters. You've heard His voice, and once you've heard His voice, everything else fades into the background. You don't need more signs. You need more trust. That statement might feel confronting, especially when you've been waiting for confirmation, waiting for clarity, waiting for something external to validate what your spirit already knows deep down. But God doesn't lead us by signs alone. He leads us by relationship. He leads us through trust, and trust doesn't always come with a spotlight or a thunderclap. Trust is quiet. It's a decision, a posture of the heart that says, even if I don't see everything clearly, I still choose to follow. So many times we delay obedience because we're waiting for another sign. We ask for reassurance, for repeated confirmations, for signs upon signs, hoping that somehow we'll feel more secure. But the truth is, no number of signs can substitute for the peace that comes from simply trusting God. Because signs might confirm a moment, but trust sustains the journey. Trust is what carries you when the signs aren't there, when things are unclear, when the way forward looks impossible. That's where trust becomes real faith. There's nothing wrong with asking God for confirmation. He's gracious. He understands our need to be certain, especially when we're stepping into something unfamiliar. But at some point, confirmation must give way to conviction. At some point, we stop asking, "Is this you, God?" And we start saying, "I trust you, God." That shift changes everything. It moves us from spiritual indecision to spiritual maturity. Because maturity is not measured by how many signs you receive, it's measured by how willing you are to obey without them. Sometimes the reason we feel like we're not hearing God is not because He's silent, but because we're waiting for Him to say something different. We want Him to confirm what He's already made clear. We want the comfort of certainty without the discomfort of faith. But faith is not the absence of uncertainty. It's the presence of trust, and trust doesn't always come with visible assurance. Sometimes it comes with a quiet knowing that even if you can't see the full picture, the one who holds it is faithful. God is not trying to confuse you. He's not playing games with your heart. If He's spoken, He hasn't changed His mind. You don't need 10 signs when He's already given you peace. You don't need another word when He's already given you His word. The signs were never meant to replace your faith. They were meant to support it. But your next step won't be built on a sign. It will be built on trust. And here's what's beautiful. When you begin to walk in trust, you start to see things you never would have seen from the sidelines. You realize that God doesn't just confirm things with signs. He confirms them through your peace, your provision, your growth. But you only experience that once you move, once you trust, once you say yes, even if everything in you wants another reason to wait. God speaks not to tease, but to transform and lead. His voice is never random, never aimless, never careless. When God speaks, he is sowing purpose into your spirit. He's not dangling promises just to keep you reaching without a rival. He's not giving you glimpses of your future to stir up frustration. He's awakening you to destiny. There's a difference between being teased and being trained. And when God speaks, he is training your spirit to see beyond what your eyes can. His voice is both a map and a mirror. It shows you where you're going and reminds you of who you are. Transformation always begins with a word. In the beginning, God spoke and the world responded. Creation itself was birthed from his voice. So when he speaks into your life, he is not giving you noise. He's giving you newness. His words carry the power to create, shift, and resurrect. When you hear him, something inside you begins to move. Something wakes up. Something breaks free, because his voice doesn't come to entertain. It comes to evolve. It confronts your comfort, calls out your courage, and reveals the hidden places you didn't even know needed healing. And yet, even in his correction, his voice is kind. He doesn't speak to shame you. He speaks to shape you. His words don't expose to wound. They expose to restore. This is the God who speaks to the broken parts of your story and breathes life into them. The God who sees your confusion and still dares to speak clarity. The God who knows how heavy your heart is and yet still speaks hope. That is not teasing, that is transformation, but God also speaks to lead. He is intentional with direction. You may not always understand the fullness of what he says in the moment, but his words are seeds. Sometimes they don't make sense until the season changes. Sometimes what he spoke to you in private becomes your answer in public. This is why trust is so essential, because when God speaks, he may not give you the full picture, but he always gives you what you need for the next step. His voice lights the path, even if it doesn't reveal the destination all at once. When you believe that God is leading you, not teasing you, you stop treating his voice like a suggestion and start treating it like strategy. You stop delaying your obedience because you realize that every word he gives is meant to take you somewhere you couldn't go without him. His voice doesn't come to create confusion. It comes to create alignment. You were never meant to figure everything out on your own. You were meant to be led, and being led means responding, even when it's unfamiliar, even when it's inconvenient, even when it stretches you. This is why it's so important to hold on to what he said, even when it's quiet. Because God doesn't retract his word when life gets hard. What he spoke was never a tease. It was a trajectory, a divine invitation to walk into something greater than you imagined. You were created for communion. His voice is your inheritance. Before you were ever aware of God, he was already aware of you. Before you ever spoke a word to him, he had already written every one of your days. That kind of love doesn't create you just to leave you in silence. That kind of intentionality doesn't design you for distance. It creates you for closeness, for dialogue, for connection. You were not made to wander through life guessing who you are or where you're going. You were created to walk in step with the one who formed you. His voice isn't a luxury. It's part of your identity. Communion is more than communication. It's deep connection. It's the constant awareness of his presence, the ongoing exchange between your heart and his. It's what Adam and Eve had in the garden before the fall, unbroken fellowship. They walked with God, talked with him, heard him. That was the original design, and through Christ, that design is restored. You now have access, not just to God's love, but to his leading. You have access to his thoughts, his wisdom, his peace, his correction. and that access isn't reserved for a spiritual elite. It's your inheritance as a child of God. An inheritance is not something you work for, it's something you receive, and the voice of God isn't something you have to earn with perfect behavior or flawless faith. It's something you step into because of who you are in Him. He calls you His own, and part of being His is hearing Him. Jesus said, "My sheep hear my voice, not my perfect sheep, not my gifted sheep, simply my sheep." That means if you belong to Him, then His voice is part of the relationship. It's not strange, not rare, it's natural, but like any relationship, communion takes intentionality. You can't hear clearly from someone you never spend time with. You can't recognize a voice you've never leaned in to learn. So many people believe God is silent when He's really just waiting to be prioritized. His voice is present, it's steady, but our attention often isn't. We're tuned into everything else, and then we wonder why we feel distant. But when you begin to tune your heart to His, when you create room to listen, you'll find that He's been speaking all along. Hearing from God isn't about being super spiritual. It's about being deeply available. It's about cultivating stillness, inviting Him in, and trusting that He actually desires to respond. And He does, sometimes with words, sometimes with impressions, sometimes with peace that doesn't make sense. His voice may come differently in different seasons, but it will always come, because communion is the core of why you exist, not just to do things for God, but to walk with Him, to know Him, to hear Him. His voice is not a distant echo. It's a present promise, and it's already yours. As we reflect on the profound reality that God speaks to us, we must remember that His voice is not a distant, rare occurrence, but a constant invitation into deeper communion with Him. The truth that God speaks to you, not because of your perfection, but because of His love and your willingness to listen, should ignite a new sense of purpose and peace in your heart. His voice is not a random noise, but a carefully woven message designed to transform, lead, and restore you to the fullness of your destiny. The journey of hearing God is not just about receiving guidance. It is about being shaped, drawn closer to His heart, and renewed in your identity as His beloved child. When we understand that His presence speaks louder than the noise of the world, we begin to recognize that peace, clarity, and direction are not found in the chaos around us, but in the stillness of His presence. It's in that sacred space that His voice becomes unmistakable. The world will continue to shout its opinions, fears, and expectations, but God's voice invites you to listen closely, to discern truth from distraction, and to be anchored in the reality of who you are in Him. We also learn that we don't need endless signs or constant reassurance. Trust in God allows us to step forward even when the path is unclear, knowing that His word is enough. When God speaks, it is not a mere suggestion, it is a blueprint for your life. His words are not given to tease or confuse, but to lead you into the fullness of His plan for you. They are the instructions, the lifeline, the direction you need to navigate the challenges of life with confidence. In every moment of uncertainty, we must remind ourselves that you were created for communion with God. His voice is not a foreign concept. It's your inheritance as a child of the King. The ability to hear from God is not reserved for a select few, but is available to everyone who is willing to listen, to lean in, and to trust. The voice of God is not a luxury. It is part of the relationship He desires to have with you. And when you embrace that relationship, you begin to walk with a clarity and assurance that surpasses understanding. So, as you move forward in life, know that God is not silent. He is speaking through His Word, through the Holy Spirit, through circumstances, through others, and often through the quiet nudges of your heart. The question is not whether God speaks, but whether you are positioned to hear. Will you silence the distractions, still your soul, and allow His voice to guide you? Will you trust him enough to obey without needing further signs? The more you listen, the more you will hear, and the deeper your relationship with God will become. The truth is, God speaks to you, and as you grow in your willingness to hear, you will find that his voice becomes the most consistent, steady, and transformative sound in your life.